Folks, thanks for coming out. My name is Mark Miller. I'm the Senior Vice President at Western Governors University and Executive Dean of our College of Education, our Teachers College. I'll give you a little bit more on that in a bit. We're here today to talk about this notion of a time for learning experience design. And it really is wrapped around this idea of this moment in education as we're emerging from the kind of pandemic issues of the last 2 years and visioning the road ahead. And we're joined today by a couple of great folks. Kelvin Bentley, who is Senior Consultant with WGU Labs. Hello, Kelvin, how are you?
Good.
And we also have Nate McLennan, who is the Vice President for Strategy and Innovation with Getting Smart, right? Yeah, I love it, out of the K12 world. Now, we had an amazing fourth person, Dr. Kim Round, who got caught up in that wonderful set of flights that got canceled all across the country, and so she's not able to be here and balance our energy out, which is such a bummer. But we'll go on without that. But give me a chance to welcome them. Give me a good round of applause. So let's kick in right away on this idea of reflecting on the last 2 years. So before we do that, I just want to get a sense, I want to give folks in the room a sense of where you all sit. Okay, like I've been in the world of K-20 education for the last 30 years. Now our College of Education, you might not know this, but our College of Education at Western Governors is the largest college of education in the country. We work with about 2,600 school districts all around the country. We're the only college of ed that maps the teacher licensure in all 50 states. We work with about 2,600 school districts and have deep clinical sites all over the country. We do teacher education, leadership education, and now we're going into higher ed. We have a master's in learning experience design that works in K-12 higher ed and in employer-based learning, and soon to have a master's in higher ed leadership. So our aperture is really this, what I would call a K-20 plus aperture. And I'm going to turn to you, Nate, first. Your aperture is heavily focused on the innovation space, especially in the K-12 environment. Give us a little bit about your background.
Yeah. So my background is education. So started out as a math science teacher, had the great opportunity to help found a school, was principal of that school for about a decade, and then pivoted that model into a national network focused on rural education, really connecting learning to local ecosystems. And in that time did two ed tech type startups, one around competency-based and another one around how do we crowdsource teacher observation, things like that, like in your world. And then in June, pivoted over to Getting Smart because I was really interested in how do I help amplify and accelerate others that are in the spaces that I had the privilege of working in for 20 years. And so work on strategy and innovation with helping foundations, districts, universities that run and play in the K-12 space think about what's next and helping them move ideas forward that are helping innovation for equity rather than innovation just for the sake of innovation.
Give folks a little bit of background on Getting Smart.
Yeah, so Getting Smart, really small outfit, about 14 folks, and we are really focused on two things. So one is a media half, so we do podcasts and blogging on anything and everything that we think is front forward facing, what's signaling in especially K-12 and sometimes beyond. And then the other half is working in thought leadership partnership with schools, districts, foundations, universities to say, what's next? And just helping them. And the third, which we don't talk about a lot, is we just love connecting people. Especially this conference is our birthday party because we love just connecting people, saying, have you met this person? Have you met this person? Because we think that's so important to make sure people are talking in this space and help accelerate good things for all young people, not just some.
And Getting Smart was founded by?
Tom Vander Ark, who ran Gates Foundation ed work for a decade or more, and connected with everybody in the education world.
Gotcha. Kelvin, give me a little bit of your background. You are much more the higher ed aperture, so give us a little bit about your background.
So yeah, my background primarily is in higher education, and so I got involved in digital learning because I was an assistant professor of psychology at Northwestern State University in Louisiana. So I was a Michigander who then decided to live in Louisiana, so that was an interesting transition. But at the time, this was like 2001, so at the time we were actually building the state's first Bachelor of Science program in psychology that was fully online. And I loved the work so much because it allowed me to kind of collaborate with folks, not just within the academic department of psychology, but also across the campus. And Was really interested in that work, decided I wanted to be an administrator of online learning programs, and so the bulk of my career, I've worked for 2-year or 4-year schools, usually at a director's level or above, overseeing online programs. I'm also working to kind of find the gaps where there were a lack of student services available to students online, which you can imagine back in 2001, it was very Wild West, right? So we were offering programs, but yet we didn't have tutoring, or yet we didn't have proctoring that was fully online. And so that's a little bit about me. I've also done some consulting with Blackboard and Tangle Solutions before they were acquired by Guild. But that's a little bit about me.
So what's been interesting about the folks here on this in this conversation is that we've lived through the last 25, 30 years of change in the world of education and seen interesting conversations. I mean, I still remember in the mid-90s trying to convince people that the internet was a thing, right?
Right.
Like the initial days of it. And then fast forward, through the kind of rise of LMSs, the rise of mobile technology, the rise of social media. And then the last 2 years with this pandemic, right? This is where I want to turn for a second, is I want to do kind of a little plus delta on this. Like, what did the world of education do well, and what should we really rethink in terms of how we approach it? I want to kick into the good news first, right? The last 2 years has been a mass orientation to digital tools. There's a whole host of K12 educators, higher education leaders, even employee development folks who've been doing work and training had to suddenly dive deep into the tools that were available to them. And I would argue they were incredibly creative. There were some unbelievably creative solutions to the challenges people faced. And I think it opened a lot of people's eyes to what we could be doing in this kind of world. Nate, just give me your 2 cents on what you saw that was exciting, interesting, energetic in the space.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that we saw was that it was possible to shift something like education. Right? And I don't think anyone before the pandemic would have said you could switch and pivot every person to some sort of digital technology that quickly. Right? Even if the teacher hated it or the students were not successful, we at least made the effort to move the system really, really quickly. And the needle moved fast. And so I think the positives is that there were so many people that were not digital natives that became digital natives quickly. And so those that were successful and the bright spots were those that were already employed, some sort of, even if it was a rudimentary LMS. Yeah. They were already on board, and when they had to shut down and close their doors, it was an easy thing for those schools to suddenly bring their students online. So I'll pause there, because then there's all the caveats that come with it.
Yeah, but I was blown away by how fast people began embracing leveraging the synchronous tools, in particular the video platforms, and how fast our platforms got adopted, stable, and leveraged. Because I would argue, before the pandemic hit, maybe I was probably doing 1 or 2 of those video connections a month, right? And now we're suddenly doing 20 a day, right? In terms of how that played out. So Kelvin, give me your sense of, the things you saw that were exciting or interesting, coming out of the last couple of years, how people really kind of met this moment.
Yeah, I would say, and my role is a little bit different now, because within WSU Labs, I work with ed tech companies, early stage ed tech companies that are trying to grow, make an impact at scale in terms of learning. But talking with colleagues, I think it's like people moving, online, leveraging, like you said, Zoom and other bits of technology to support the learning. And doing it very quickly. I would say a non-technology thing that I've been hearing about that I've always cared about in digital learning is the equity lens. I think a lot of people have also been focused on mental health of students and how do we actually get services available to them. And so I feel like there's the issue of equity has actually risen much higher when I think, even with online learning being available before, I don't know if we were always focused on that. I think there was, faculty who were interested in teaching online, but yet, some faculty were still, assigning very expensive textbooks, and then maybe not textbooks that would be amenable to online delivery, or being embedded into the learning management system for easy use and access. And so that's what I think that's one thing that's kind of come out of the pandemic more than just the technology.
So I want to go there quick because I don't think
Yeah.
I don't want to make sure we're clear about this. This isn't just about the technology. I think that's exactly right. And I think it was probably not just the pandemic, it was the social justice challenges, the political challenges of the last 2 years combined with the pandemic. We saw education try to learn more about their learners than ever before. I think there was more work on social emotional learning, there was more work on basic needs, there was more work on mental health, there was a ton of work on privilege versus folks who have real challenges and having resources, digital divide, a host of others. By the way, there's a great issue of Change magazine that came out last year it was called Meeting This Moment, Innovation in the Time of Crisis and Need. And it was innovators and higher education institutions from across the country talking about how they kind of leaned into this. And I was amazed how little of it was about technology and how much of it was about trying to understand the learners and kind of meeting them where they were and taking them where they needed to go. Nate, from your vantage point, especially in the K-12 space, that became one of the cornerstone conversations because it was about SEL for the faculty and staff and not just for the students, right?
Yeah, and I think that, so two things. One is that we likely got to know our students better through the pandemic than we knew them before, which is a real irony. You wouldn't expect that to happen, but they
weren't face to face, but we got to know them better.
Yeah, but we had to dive in. And then because of the stresses it put on the system, we realized that, of course, as we all know, SEL is for everybody. And we have to pay attention in the education space. If us as adults aren't practicing it, how on earth do we expect them to help support young people moving it forward? And then that gets into the whole idea of the other thing that I think we've learned is around the power of mentoring and connection, and even in the online settings, how important that is. And if we deliver an incredible online learning experience and we neglect the mentoring and the one-on-one and the relationship building and the understanding background, if we miss that piece, it just won't reach the goals that we have for it.
Kelvin, how important was the fact that we were going through a shared experience while we were having these very difficult conversations around social justice and around, and again, around the political turmoil? I mean, it's interesting that we ended up having those conversations at a moment where we weren't physically present often, but we were going through a shared experience. That did make for an interesting time in the world of education.
It did. It kind of countered it countered a problem or not a problem, I have to be careful what I say, a challenge that we still have in higher education because, again, we're very decentralized, right? And so academic freedom at the level of the instructor, faculty maybe not always collaborating on the best ways to teach or even to share materials, because my materials as a psychology professor I like, but you may not like it, or you might feel empowered to come up with materials or select materials that you prefer. And so now I think, with the pandemic, it did change that a bit. It did, get faculty kind of maybe working together, opening them up to collaboration a little bit more. But it's an ongoing challenge because, again, I think, academic freedom is great, but then there's also, it has to be balanced with academic responsibility. We have to do a better job of finding a way to, again, keep students at the center of what we're doing and not always, work in silos, right? Which is another presentation down the road, but that's a challenge that we still have.
So there was a lot of, I would say, talented educators and folks really working hard to meet the moment. I saw more scenario planning than I've ever seen, where people really kind of tried to really figure out how they could move on the road ahead. Let's talk about some of the challenges, right? And I think there's a series of challenges. For example, this time last year, right? People, I think, assumed, okay, we're done, right? And kind of get back to normal chance we're starting. And I would argue there was a whole lot of hope casting, right, about what it was going to look like in the fall, and boy, that hit people between the eyes, right? So and that's only one of the many challenges. So I'd love for you to talk about what do you see as some of the real challenges people had, because I think there were some folks who just kept hoping it would go away, right? They were kind of hoping the moment would leave and they'd be able to get back to normal pretty quick. And then once they found out it was longer, boy, it was tough on a lot of folks.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, students now are like, well, yeah, I'm kind of used to, online courses being, where there's a video component, or I'm used to, maybe taking more of the majority of my classes online. And once literally once the cat is out of the bag, it's really hard for students just to kind of go back to business as usual, right? I mean, I think we're still trying to figure out what that needs to be, you know, regardless of the pandemic. But I think I think within higher ed, there's still, I don't know, it's part, again, academic freedom concerns, and then of course with that tenure and promotion processes that don't always reinforce what we're trying to do, which is, you know, pushing higher ed to try new things. Data, like, again, we all kind of moved to do online learning or remote learning, but, you know, was there a plan in place, or did we kind of just throw everybody into a Zoom room and then work off of our PowerPoints?
Let's go there for a second, because I think
like,
one of the real challenges we're seeing
Yeah.
is people conflating emergency remote learning with the 20 years of the discipline of high quality digital content.
Right.
There are people who've been at this for a few decades, building really good digital courseware, and that's different than remote learning. And we've often said that, like, equating one with the other is like saying that a life raft is the same as a luxury liner. They both float, but they're very different experiences, right? So talk a bit about that idea that people, because what I hear sometimes, people, oh, now we know how bad online learning is.
Yeah.
Like, and the fact is, you know, what they experienced was emergency remote learning. That's a different thing.
Right. And I think, just to sort of reassert what was said here, is that what happened was the educators are already thinking about high quality online learning. We're already there. It was an easy transition for them because they're already delivering something that made sense and was effective at engaging students. Where we're going to be challenged, which I think is the biggest challenge, is that breath of relief when everyone says, great, we can go right back to where we were. Mm-hmm. And if we really look at ourselves in the mirror, where we were was not serving all kids.
No, not at
serving
all.
More than half of them.
Wasn't working for a lot of people.
10%.
Yeah.
So my biggest fear is that we go through COVID, we learn all these things, we already have high quality tools, they're only getting better, and people go back to what it was because it feels like, I can relax. Right. And in the meantime, what's happened is that young people have discovered they have way more agency, they're way more discerning and discriminating about what's good learning, when am I engaged, how can I be engaged. It was more personalized probably during COVID than it was in their previous classroom. And so you have the young people saying, the young learners want more, and yet a lot of teachers are taking a step back and saying,
And a lot of parents were exposed
Correct.
to the
That's
curriculum and the processes, right?
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of parents talk about the idea that they had no idea, like, the tyranny of the worksheets.
Yes.
Right? That's how learning was actually happening with a lot of their kids. And that really opened their eyes to what else is possible. So one of the big things we're seeing nationally, by the way, is, for example, summer schools. Summer school last year ended up being dominated not by just credit recovery, which was a thing for a long time. Summer schools are now being dominated by accelerators. People coming in who want to accelerate their learning and do things different. That is people being willing to try something different, and that's going to just force people to think differently. We learned in higher ed that office hours make little sense physically, doing them face to face when you have working students. Office hours that you can do with remote learning, like leveraging Zoom and leveraging Teams, makes sense because I can come in and come out, and I don't have to drive to campus, get childcare, do X, Y, and Z for a 15-minute meeting, right? So that's where, Kelvin, this idea of we have to figure out what we want to bring forward. What do we learn that we want to bring forward? And there's still some resistance to that because there are some people who are like, okay, good. Okay, first sign that it's good, we're going to go back to normal, right?
Right. And I think, again, it's a great opportunity for us to, again, and I hate to use this phrase given COVID and its impact on us, a postmortem, right? Like to pull back, spend time actually, interviewing all of our faculty, interviewing as many students as possible, to really collect as much data about what was the experience like for you, what were the good practices, what didn't work. Because there is this assumption that, we just did this and it was great and it was awesome. But behind the scenes, what did we actually learn? And what are some things that are still missing in our model?
And I don't think it's a postmortem. I actually think it is. I think that's a brilliant idea. I think educational institutions should probably take a step back and say, let's do a showcase of our innovations. What did we do over the last 2 years? And what did we learn?
That didn't work.
Exactly, because I think you're trying to figure out what didn't work is sometimes some of the best stuff, right?
Yeah, and I think that there's a difference between sort of there's the cohort of tools, the Padlet and the Jamboard and using Zoom well, all those things are great. And then there's the model itself.
Right.
And I think what we're going to see emerging post-pandemic is this idea that those that are rethinking the model will actually make stronger gains and grounds.
Talk about that, because one of the
So,
biggest trends
yeah.
out there in K12 is this Mastery
Yep.
Transcript Consortium,
Yep.
right? So if you go to mastery.org, it is 400 public and private schools that are coming together around the idea of gradeless education, of focusing on progression based on learning. WGU knows a little bit about that, right, in terms of our
Yeah,
work.
you've done it, yeah.
But it's that idea that, hey, let's focus on students learning what they know. And my favorite thing I've heard about this is the grade-based system ends up in a cycle of blame and shame, where kids and parents and other people either blame themselves, right? Or they have a sense of shame around it, or they blame the teacher, right? And that blame and shame cycle is hard. Whereas mastery-based learning is kind of a grace and challenge cycle, where, okay, you didn't get it this time, let's work harder and go after it the next time, and let's figure out how we get it, which is a different kind of cycle. Talk a bit about how that's playing out, because that's a real conversation in a lot of schools.
Yeah, I mean, here, so to exemplify this, I have two kids who are both in high school now. K8, totally ungraded. They never saw a letter grade. They changed schools, 9 through 12, now letter graded. And the speed with which they changed to, oh, to get an A, I need this, and that's what I need to do next on the test, from, oh, this is what I learned today in school, was instantaneous. It was so quick, the pivot back. So I do think that from a future in a signaling way, competency-based or mastery-based is what's going to be the future. And I think it's for a couple things. One is that it's much more motivating in the long run. Second is that it's an easier thing for both college and post-secondary, so employment, et cetera.
And by the way, the Mastery Transcript Consortium is literally leveraging software to build a mastery transcript instead of grades, so that colleges and universities can accept the mastery transcript, not a graded transcript. And last year was the first year universities started taking mastery transcripts.
Yep, and they've been doing, I mean, the honest truth is they've been dealing with homeschool students for years who didn't have fancy grades and all that kind of stuff. But schools at the secondary level are all building portraits of graduates that say you need to be good at collaborating and you need to be good at leading and communicating. And they're trying to figure out, how on earth do we measure this stuff? And so competency-based is a really effective way to do that. How do you effectively build evidence against being a good collaborator, being a good communicator? All the skills that employers say are absolutely missing when they hire college graduates or high school graduates.
Right.
It's not the content they're missing. They're missing the skills and those proficiencies and those work-based things, skills that we all need to succeed in the workplace.
And Kelvin, that's in the higher ed space, that's the skills conversation that people are trying to lean into, right?
Right.
Talk about that a bit, about how that's going to play out.
Boy, how much time do we have? So because it's a hydra. I mean, there's so many different things going on within higher ed, because it's we're having conversations right now. I think some schools, through the Competency-Based Education Network that some of you have maybe heard of. I mean, there are exemplars, but again, there are few I mean, there's how many schools according to IPED's data are there? Right, 7,000 plus schools, right? And so CBEN's membership is nowhere near that. And so how do we actually get more schools to actually do competency-based education? How many, because if we can do that, that helps with the skills conversation, because then if I can document what my skills are from high school through college or college-like experiences, because it doesn't always have to be college. It could be, again, working in the workforce. I can have almost like kind of like an internship year or a gap year, and still document the skills that I'm learning, right? I don't have to necessarily get a college degree, but there's still so many employers that still require it. And so it's going to be very interesting just to see how a very decentralized area like higher ed is, to what extent can we actually work together to agree on what those skills are, and then not get into the transfer nonsense that we have now, right? Where my intro to psych is so much better than your intro to psych. That could
His
actually
intro to psych
happen,
is really good, though.
right? But that could happen at a skills level, right? So then that problem is actually compounded and made worse if the skills that you value are perceived to be very different from the skills that I've been given the blessing at my institution.
Yeah.
So that's what worries me. Like, we have to, even though we're decentralized or autonomous colleges and universities, can we agree on a nomenclature, a currency like skills that we actually all can agree upon? for the most part. I mean, the elites will continue to be elites. R1s will probably still be R1s, but everyone else, can we actually work together?
So let's bring this to the title of the presentation, like a time for learning experience design.
Yeah.
So we're about to launch a program. I wish Kim was here because she could unpack it. It was her brainchild, which this idea of learning experience design is a program that is focused on deeply understanding who the learner is, really being clear about what your learning outcomes are, and then figuring out how you can transform that learning experience and think about how you create and curate a set of learning experiences that have somebody end up in the state you want them to end up in. And here's the difference, is very often we end up being reductionistic. We make K12 and or higher education feel like it's a collection of classes, right? And higher education, K12 education is not a collection of classes. At its best, it is a family of experiences that are created and curated together, including co-curricular activities, mentorships, internships, connections, right? And what you want to think about is how do you bring the best of your design thinking together with the data we have about what's working and what's not, together with the domain experience to create that family of experiences for folks. So the program Kim has developed is a master's in learning experience design that's really a mashup of instructional design, ed tech, together with design thinking. And every student goes through a design lab, and then they take that learning design lab and they apply it either into K12, higher ed, or into employer-based learning. But I love this idea of now's the time to do this. Because there are a lot of folks who are saying, hey, now's the time to actually go back to normal. No. Like you said, normal wasn't working for a whole lot of folks. And a new normal is just going to be Zoom on top of what we did before, right? We need to think about a new possible, and a new possible is, what can we do with the tool? We've all had this mass orientation now. How do we bring our creativity together to create and curate this family of experiences? Nate, I know you're seeing this in the space, that this is the conversation that's happening where education is now saying, okay, let's take a deep breath. Let's do some appreciative inquiry, see what we did well, what we didn't like, and let's try to create something different, right?
Yeah, and I think you used to talk about empathy as the first step in design, right? So I think we're targeting, we're finally getting to the idea that it really matters what the learner thinks, because they're going to be our best. They're the ones we're working with, and they're going to tell us how to do this in a way that makes sense for them. The challenge is that because of neurodiversity, every learner is different. And so that leads us down that personalized pathway. It's like, so when you're a learning designer, we need to be really thinking about every learner is different, so how do we bring the learners into that process? And so just a few concrete examples. There's a cool company that came out of Stanford called Curious Cardinals. And Curious Cardinals is one of their pieces is that they have college students and others that are, it's called independent projects, and any learner online can say, I want to do this independent project, and they'll mentor them on that project. Right? And then there's competencies that come out and things like that. Or you look like an example called like OutSchool, which just blew up during the epidemic, the pandemic. And OutSchool it worked because there was 10,000 people around the world that were advertising short courses that they were interested in. And so the selection is infinite. And so it gets to this place of when we're doing learning design, two things. One is we have to have the learner involved in that design. That should be part of the process.
That was a big aha for people during the pandemic. We should really listen to our learners, right?
And the second thing is it has to be hackable, meaning the learner has to be able to rearrange the blocks.
Yeah.
And there may be a set of required blocks or competencies or whatever they're trying to achieve, but how the Legos all fit together, ultimately, when we look forward for signals that are happening, is that's going to be the long-term play. Is the learners, especially older learners, start to reassemble things that work for them, OutSchool or Curious Cardinals or whatever online course, et cetera, into a pathway that achieves the competencies that then lead them to a family-sustaining wage, et cetera.
Yeah, and Kelvin, part of this is kind of rethinking. We have such a linear view of education. You go to K12, then you go to higher ed, then you go to work, when that's not how it's going to happen anymore. Now it's really going to be this kind of rowdier space. And people have actually talked about rethinking high school should no longer be about getting a diploma. High school should be a time where you can optimize the amount of learning you do, where you can actually maximize credential attainment, right? So I can get badges and micro-credentials and associate's degrees and bachelor's degrees. Same thing in the world of higher education is how do you kind of create those family of experiences? Talk a bit about, because I know in labs you're working with a lot of folks around the country that are really thinking experimentally about this kind of stuff, and that's kind of the network that they're trying to build, is people who are willing to try these different things.
Yeah, I mean, we're working with different companies that are focused on things like career coaching. We're working with, there's a pilot within WGU around a hybrid college experience. So actually, working with folks locally to take the duet model, which came out of SNU, to actually, have students or learners actually complete online CBE or competency-based education courses. Within local communities. So yeah, I mean, those are just some of the examples of some of the things that we're trying to do. Yeah.
I think what was interesting for us in our College of Education is we had a number of people who they're eager to get our graduates. Like we grew by 12% first year of the pandemic. We'll probably grow anywhere from 6 to 10% this year. And part of it is I think people want somebody who's had this experience, right? And so Maureen Stover, who was the North Carolina Teacher of the Year 2 years ago or a year ago, and she was up for the National Teacher of the Year position, graduate of our college. She was a former Air Force intelligence officer who went back to become a teacher. And she will tell you, in fact, if you go, we have this great kind of rowdy learning community. If you go to wgu.edu/learning community, we have all different kinds of stories of different things that we're doing at our College of Ed, but one of them is a story on Maureen. And the neat thing about Maureen is she said, when the pandemic hit, she had so many colleagues that were in a panic about what to do. And she said, I kind of already experienced mastery-based, high-quality digital learning, so I'm just going to steal. So by the way, she'll tell you the best teachers use the CASE method. CASE stands for copy and steal everything. Right? So if somebody else do it well, they're going to pull it in. So she basically said, I just created like little WGUs in my classes, and it started going really well, and other people wanted to pull it in. That's where the idea of being able to see different experiences and pull it into something very different. Nate, that's where we've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Yeah. Because we have some very different learning models. Things like mastery learning, changing the nature of time, like changing the nature of progression. This is not going to be easy for educators.
No, and I think that, WGU is certainly leading the way in this area. ASU is doing some work with Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College, but just thinking about or rethinking what does teacher education look like. We are still the vast majority, there are great people, great students, and I don't think we're teaching them for the classroom that we're talking about that's emerged from the pandemic. Experts in digital literacy in terms of learning design, competency-based, personalized, strong experience, using the learner ecosystem, giving students agency. It's all touched on. I just don't think there's enough emphasis on that. I think we're catching up, I think, in the ed school realm.
Kelvin, there's really going to be this almost an entire array of responses to this moment, right? And I think at minimum, you're going to see people who are saying, okay, we have to use our digital architecture for continuity of service, right? We had continuity of service for our business operations, but now we need it for our learning operations. And at minimum, they'll use it for things like natural disasters or for storms or whatever it is, all the way up to possible pandemics. But the higher thing is, what's the highest and best use of all these tools and technologies for us to try to improve and expand learning? Are you seeing that kind of notion of how do we improve and expand learning at a deeper level really coming to the fore?
Man. So, again, I think there are examples, right? There's WGU, there's ASU, there's SNU. I think there needs to be a vehicle more for schools to share what they're up to, because I think what ends up happening is that, again, the mega universities that are out there, we hear a lot about them, like in the Chronicle or Inside Higher Ed, but I think we need to have more of a vehicle for schools to kind of share, what are you doing differently? How are you future-proofing yourself? I hate to use that phrase, but how are you rethinking your pedagogical model? Have you taken an inventory of all of the different technologies that your instructors are using? Do you actually notice that there's like several versions of the same technology to do the same thing? Are there economies of scale and use of your technologies? And I don't think enough schools are doing that, but I think there are some out there. But I think just, based on member organizations and things like that, I don't think we always hear about them or hear about them in ways outside of conferences. So in my world, when I say my world, my head, I think about, like, if I had VC money or if I was, super rich because I played the lotto, I would love to find a way to incentivize schools sharing more of their good practices and also their challenges, and making that more visible, so that you don't have to wait to go to a conference. You don't have to wait to hear about it even in a publication, right? Like there would be an interesting dashboard where we can actually track what schools are kind of doing in near real time, which again, that's a tall order, because again, lots of people don't want you to see, Freud talks about the ego hating anxiety, or hating being seen in a negative light, and we need to be uncomfortable with that, but not just be uncomfortable, because I think we're uncomfortable already, but that uncomfortableness turns into, we're just going to do the same things we've always done. We need to really flip that, use a judo move and flip that uncomfortableness to actually saying, you know what, I don't have all the answers as an institution, but I'm willing to learn. I want to share what we're up to. It's not a zero-sum game. WGU will never have all the students in the world. Neither will ASU or the other larger schools. And so how can we actually get presidents on board to say, yes, I want in on this collaboration. I want to collaboratively create the classroom or the learning experiences of the future.
Or, I got to tell you, just sharing what's out there and letting people know. I think you're exactly right. I was at a school last week, a Lone Star College in Greater Houston, that they're doing amazing work with AR, with artificial reality and with virtual reality to teach health care. And they have haptic labs. They're people who are going in and kind of seeing holographic vascular systems and internal. It's amazing what they're able to do. But there was a whole group of people who were from that college who were like, I had no idea we had this.
Yeah.
Like, they had no idea their own college was doing something like this. So I think we have pockets of these kinds of innovations all over, and there's these islands of innovation are never going to be able to get to the impact we want unless we're kind of starting pulling them together.
Right.
We started piloting our own. We're doing a session tomorrow on the metaverse, where we're using virtual reality in our teacher education, mainly because it helps us with a clinical problem, where students, when they go to their clinical experiences, aren't necessarily going to have the DE&I experiences we really want them to have. We don't know they're going to have experience the discipline, handling certain disciplines. They're not going to be able to have that special education incident we want them to have. So we created a virtual reality set of simulations, and the students love it, because they can go in and get reps in a fail-safe environment and learn from that. And it's this in-between space between the books and the clinical. So it solved a problem for us, but also think about the fact that now those rising teachers have touched it. They've actually touched virtual reality, augmented reality. They have some ideas of what that's going to look like. You're seeing the same kind of thing happening, where people are like, how can we expose educators to the tools that's out there?
And I think that K12 probably a little bit different than post-secondary is, I think that everything that needs to exist in some form or another is out there in the K12 universe. All the forward-thinking ideas are being tried somewhere. Two resources for folks to look at: Canopy Project that Transcend puts out, so you can just Google that. And then on gettingsmart.com, our site, we list the 100 most innovative schools every year. And you can find all sorts of pockets of innovation of people that are doing amazing things. Because I'm a big fan of freeware across the board for K12 and beyond, is how do we share widely. I think the other piece is that thinking about education and what you were talking about with teacher training is thinking about students are going to be involved in these metaverse worlds more and more. And if teachers coming in and coming up into the classroom are not aware of the metaverse, what is that? How can they best serve those students? So there's a group called STEMuli that's really down in Texas that's really thinking about how do we take students that have not succeeded in their prior environments and put them into a metaverse type environment. And not only are they earning coins and interacting online, et cetera, which is really interesting, but there's also, they're playing along the altruism piece, and they get more points for taking something that they learned in the metaverse and then doing something in the real world. I mean, how powerful is that? So you have the engaging metaverse piece plus contribution back to the world. the real world, the non-metaverse, whatever that is, if there's something like that.
Yeah. But to do this kind of work, we are going to have to take learning experience design seriously,
Yep.
which means we're going to have to really keep our rhythm of staying connected to our learners, having that deep learner empathy, staying connected to what's possible, right, with the different tools and technologies and just the techniques that are out there that have nothing to do with technology, just like mastery-based learning and the rest, and then working together to say, here are the array of options given the resources we have to help these learners achieve this, but getting that rhythm to be a normal rhythm, because Nate, I would argue one of the things we really learned out of this pandemic is taking a beat and really connecting with our learners matters.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Which we should have known all along. However, yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to, so that connection, the other pieces I would add is, so we've learned a lot that giving students agency will make them achieve better.
Yeah.
But we need to facilitate that. That's not just, hey, students, do whatever you want. It's a facilitated process. And then the adage I'm thinking about a lot is it hackable? I talked about that. Is it stackable? So can you stack different learning experiences together? And is it trackable? So can you track it and document a learner journey from cradle to grave? And what does that look like?
Yeah.
And these are the things we need to be thinking about when we think about learning design. So learning design for a particular learning experience needs to fit into the larger ecosystem of all the other learning experiences, digital or not, that the students are using.
And that's the realization that it's not just about that classroom or that course.
Correct.
It's not even about a
Connected.
course, it's connected, right? That's the whole experience, right? You're trying to kind of pull together. Some of what you're doing in labs is figuring out how to get people thinking about how do you measure that whole experience
Yeah. Yeah.
and that broader piece. So final admonitions for people who are thinking about the road ahead. If you were going to tell them just really lean into a few things, what would you tell them to focus on?
Yeah, I think the message is connect with learners and co-design with them. And we'll get the product that we want or the end result that we want, which is students that feel that they have the knowledge and skills to make a difference in the world. So.
Yeah.
And again, incentivizing the faculty, because again, we have to find a way to really empower the faculty to care about focusing on the students. Not that they don't, but again, tenure promotion, there's so many other things on a faculty member's time. And so the more that we can kind of empower the faculty to care about this, educating them about the importance of being more student-centered, learning experience design, what is that? How do I do that in my class? Why is it important? They need to understand that, and then we need to incentivize through the tenure and promotion process to make it actually happen, because otherwise it's a pipe dream.
I'm really hoping that we just remember that how students, the affective domain, how students feel about learning matters in a big way. In fact, when I tell people, when I talk about any kid below 10 years old, the number one thing you should be focusing on is helping them fall in love with the learning process. Mm-hmm. That's where the drill and kill thing just destroys them. You've got to find a way for them to fall in love with learning, and that's where the affective connection comes in. So you think about that learning experience design kind of holistically with it as you're going in. During the pandemic, full disclosure, my daughter is a rising educator at UT Austin. She graduates in about 2 months, proud papa moment. But during the pandemic, she took a gap year from UT Austin. And she came out to stay with us in the mountains of Western North Carolina. We have a family of 4 kids. And so we're all together during the pandemic. My daughter and I decided I wanted her to have an experience of value during the time. So we co-authored a book together. And she was coming out of a whole series of courses on child development, so we wrote a children's book. And so she went through the full process of kind of visioning it, pulling it together, sending it out for reviews, pulling it back, getting a publisher, and publishing it. And the book's called The Sugar Chair Stories. And The Sugar Chair Stories comes from a Alabama educator named Becky Hodges, who used to use a sugar chair in her classroom, and the sugar chair was an alternative to timeouts. So instead of going into timeout, you sat in the sugar chair, and the sugar chair had a rhythm, which is you slow down, you look around, you figure out how to sweeten things up. You don't get out of the chair till you have a plan to sweeten things up. And you get the idea. It's reflection, it's introspection, it's empathy, seeing through other people's eyes, and then growth mindset, right? And kind of goal setting. And the neat thing about that book was, one, just watching my daughter, because she used the sugar chair. We used it with her growing up, and she talked about how She used to have to go in the sugar chair, but now she wants to find a sugar chair. She wants to find her place and space to be able to do that. So we actually kind of wrote that into the book. But I would argue we're in a time in the world of education where we need to take a beat. We need to slow down. We need to look around, and we need to figure out how to sweeten things up. We need to do some work together around this in this learning experience design. And if we got good troublemakers like this, we're going to be able to do it. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you.